compra soppare per un susetto, capretto, capretto.
Welcome. I'm so pleased to be here. My name is Mark Michael Epstein. I teach at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I'm director of Beit Venezia, the international home of Jewish culture based in Venice, but apparently, since we do live in strange times, now increasingly a presence in the intersphere, if we could call it that. But you know, Beit Venezia is the home of Jewish culture in Venice. And Venice is a fascinating place in terms of Jewish culture. In 1516, as you know, the Ghetto of Venice was founded, it confined the Jews, but it also became home to a vibrant, multiplex Jewish community of diversity, Jews from Italy, Germany, Spain, and the Levant. And it also occasioned some of the most important early Jewish publishing. Among the books that was published in Venice, in 1609, a wonderful Haggadah with incredible illustrations, engravings, in fact, and text in the languages of each of the communities, so separate editions, right, for the German, the Italian, and the Spanish, Judeo-Italian, Judeo-Spanish, right, Judeo-German. In 2015, to mark the anniversary of the founding of the Ghetto, Beit Venezia embarked on an extraordinary project with Jacqueline Nichols as our lead artist, a very talented group of artists who you'll hear about shortly, convened to create a new Venice Haggadah. And under the auspices of the Scuola Internazionale di Grafica, under the leadership of Lorenzo de Castro, and with the really extraordinary help of a wonderful printer, Pierpaolo Pregnolato at Damocle Publications, the Haggadah came to be. It includes a new translation, which is quirky and interesting, but traditional. It's intended to provoke discussion. And it, of course, includes magnificent graphics and extremely thoughtful and I would say groundbreaking in many ways art, and this is graphic art, this is printed art, engravings. Of course, this all came to be under the direction of Shaul Bassi, who was at that time the director. I would like to greet everyone who's in the room today, beginning with Shaul, who will tell us a little bit about the genesis of the project, how we got to where we are, ready to present this magnificent book to you, the public. And then we'll meet the lead artist and an artist from the group, as well as the other personalities involved in this extraordinary enterprise. So without further ado, over to you, Shaul, and thank you for coming on board and spending some time with us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all our friends today. This is a very special moment. We are, the moment we're recording this, we're really a few weeks away from Pesach, and it's really an emotional moment where we can say that finally next Seder, in very difficult circumstances, at least we'll be able to sit and read from the book that we've been working on for some years now. So Beit Venezia was born under a different name, the Venice Center for International Jewish Studies, thanks to the effort of some people that I want to acknowledge here. Our founding member and President Napoleone Leo Yezurum, Zichrono Livracha, who passed away, thanks to the important, generous donation of Giovannina Sulam Reinisch, Zichrono Livracha, who was also a member of the Venetian Jewish community who took care of Jewish heritage of Venice for many years and understood that and was very sympathetic to the idea that in order to nourish this very important century-old Jewish heritage and legacy, it had to be reinvented all the time. So it was not just about preserving the amazing heritage that we have, the synagogues, the artifacts, but also to imagine that these objects and this history could be of inspiration for new artists. And that's where honoring the extraordinary tradition of Jewish publishing in Venice, that the idea came up of working on what you appropriately describe as the most beloved Jewish book, the book that exists in multiple versions, but it also lends itself to reinterpretation, to reinvention. And so we were so lucky that we came across and we got to meet some fabulous artists, Jacqueline Nichols. And it is really very special that today we also celebrate your new tenure as director of Beit Venezia, because, the Haggadah brought us together and you've been such an important force. And again, someone who coming from the outside, as was our leader and our dear friend Murray Baumgarten, who is the professor from University of California, Santa Cruz, who was the person that suggested that the Ghetto Venice, a very famous ghetto, could be once again a place for international Jewish culture. So Murray brought to Venice 25 scholars to study the ghetto back in 2006. And then a long story started that it's in a way finding a very special moment today. So, of course, I have other things to say. I just want to mention at this point that this has truly been a collective effort, that because we didn't want to have, too many small squares on a screen, we couldn't invite everybody, but for sure I think I want to acknowledge the fact that this book has benefited from the scholarship of Agi Veto, the rabbi professor Agi Veto, who edited the Hebrew text, that Rabbi Shalom Bachbut, who was the chief rabbi of Venice from 2013 to 2017, that wrote an introduction and welcomed the artist back then. I want to, of course, acknowledge the important role of Giuseppe Balzano, Beit Venezia former director, who over the years, who is the one who set up the exhibition at the Jewish Museum, where first the prints were shown. Barbara Del Mercato, who was our project manager back then, and Manuela Pegoraro, who's our current project manager, because a lot of the work could not exist without this important, and many other people that we don't have the time to mention, but the Jewish Museum, the Jewish community were all very, very supportive. All of this happened also thanks to the invaluable support of Rothschild and Adiv Foundation, and the rest you'll find in the acknowledgements of the book when you get hold of a copy, because this is the exciting moment where you can finally say the book is taken off. And now I think that it's time to simply say that Venice have a small Jewish community, but it becomes truly exciting when we have guests. So what happens is that back in 2015, we'll welcome this incredibly varied and diverse groups of artists, plus a scholar, Mark Epstein, and of course, the fact that now he's here as a director is an amazing achievement. And so now I think I will invite Jacqueline to describe what happened back then, with perhaps the help of some images, and maybe before that, actually, because I think then we want to have a longer conversation. Let me say that most of the action took place, apart from the ghetto, at a very special place, which is the Scuola Internazionale di Grafica, that is represented here by its director, Lorenzo De Castro. So I will invite Lorenzo to say something about this magical moment where Beit Venezia has also made other projects and hopefully will be the house of other projects in the future. So let me invite Lorenzo to say a few things, and maybe I'll show some pictures of the Scuola while he speaks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It has been a great honor and pleasure and fun to have had this amazing group of artists working at the Scuola. The Scuola is well, considering that we are in Venice, I wouldn't say an old institution because we were founded only in 1969, but we have been working quite a while, and we, I would say, what I really love the most of the Scuola is that I think we are rooted in the local community. We offer a service to the local community, as well as to artists and students from all over the world. So we have a very, very mixed environment at the Scuola. We have young students studying art and design, but we also have resident artists and groups of university schools coming to work here. And our goal is to put everyone who comes to work in our studios to be productive from the very first minute they step foot into our studios, into our laboratories. And so our goal was to make sure that this project was productive and effective, and that all artists were put in condition of working properly and productively. And this, I would say, happened thanks to the amazing skills of our print shop manager, who is not here now, Roberta Feoli, who assisted. She is very energetic, extremely motivated and talented, and she assisted the artists in their work. And what to say? I don't think I have much to say more. It's the book speaks by itself, and so thank you. And again, it has been a real pleasure working on this, and it will be a pleasure working on new projects with Beit Venezia. Jacqueline.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lorenzo. And it was an absolute pleasure to work in that print studio. So beautifully organized and meticulous. And it was a joy to be there with the artists. So hello, I'm Jacqueline Nichols. I'm an artist, as you can tell by my accent. I'm from London. I'm based here. And it was really exciting to be part of this project, invited by Shaol, and to work with Mark. And the challenge really was to kind of take this very beautiful Haggadah, the 1609 Venice Haggadah, and to think about creating a contemporary response, a kind of 20th, 21st century response to this. And we gathered together, we had 8 artists from 5 different countries, of quite different age groups, of different backgrounds, and also different Jewish backgrounds, like different, like each artist had like their own particular unique kind of take on their Jewishness, and how their Jewishness informed their work, informed their identity, some very traditionally, some very creatively. And it was really exciting to kind of gather us all together, and hopefully that we reflected in some way that original community of Venice that was diverse. It wasn't a monolithic community, and that we worked together, learned together, lived together, kind of drank, argued, wrote poetry, explored Venice, and really learned from each other, and worked together on this. I mean, what was really quite wonderful about the project, and we had artists here who, some were very experienced in the print room with etchings, others less so. Some were more experienced with working with traditional Jewish texts, others were less so. Everyone had like their area of expertise or their area of comfort, and then had other areas which was a bit outside of their comfort zone. And it was like, how do we create that kind of cooperative community where we work together, and that everyone kind of can learn and be with each other? And I think the work that is created, I'm really proud of it, and I'm really proud of the project that happened. And I found, I have with me my kind of notebook from our gatherings, and I have here the list of all the artists and the sections. And the way we did the process is that the first week we spent together was really very closely reading the text of the Haggadah. And then also we learned from Mark about the kind of the tradition of illuminated Haggadot, that the illuminated manuscript tradition. And we also learned about some of the history of Venice and the geography of Venice, of the lagoon, and also like lots of other really kind of interesting aspects. But I think for me, it was that close reading of just the artists around the table and going through the Haggadah text, not in the Seder way with the ritual meal, but really looking at it as a kind of almost like as a fresh text, and everyone bringing their perspectives to it, and then seeing which sections resonated with which artists, and then kind of each artist was given 2 sections to engage with and interpret in their artwork, and then it was like to see how their ideas really sparked and developed. If we can just have the next slide, please, Charles. And I want to just show this one as the next one, I think. No, that's all of us together. I want the one of Hillel's, the searching for Hummus slide. So the challenge really was for, not Hillel, sorry, this is Nathan Gottlieb. He's an artist, originally from Belgium. The challenge really is for the artists to absorb their impressions of contemporary Venice and mindful of historical Venice and also of the text, and to see how those can be brought together in these wonderful juxtapositions. And this is one of the first pieces of artwork you'll find in the book. And it is actually the sort of before the Seder. It's the searching for Hummus. It's the looking for Hummus. And here, Nathan has taken this very interesting shape of an eye and a circle, which was a piece of graffiti that we spotted in lots of places, not just in the Ghetto, but around Venice. We saw this image quite a lot. And he superimposed that onto the map of the Ghetto of Venice. And you see here in the middle, you've got somebody holding a candle. And it's really bringing kind of contemporary Venice with that graffiti into the kind of the ritual of looking and searching for chametz that you do on the day before Seder, to check that you have got your house ready for Pesach. And I felt that this artwork really kind of demonstrates a really creative and thoughtful way of bringing together contemporary Venice and what struck Nathan when he was walking the streets in Venice, and his impressions and his kind of take on that, and also responding very much to the Haggadah text. And you will see that throughout the different artists' work. If we can have the next slide, please. So this is Andy Honoritz. She is a artist from Israel. She's based in Israel. And obviously, when people think, especially tourists and people outside of Venice, when they think of Venice, you think of masks. Like that's one of almost a cliche of Venice. But what Andy did here was something really interesting. So this is her interpretation of the 4 children, the 4 different kind of children. And it's really that kind of the 4 responses to questioning children. And here she looked at the different types of masks that are available, and she associated each mask with a different child. So it's like, yes, it's a very kind of typical Venetian kind of image, like the image of the mask, but it's putting it together with the 4 children and showing that kind of actually to label a child is to put a mask on a child. And you're masking the child, and they're becoming almost like a caricature when you do that. And you see this kind of diverse and this kind of difference, which kind of very much kind of sees them almost like as cartoon characters. So I thought this was really kind of interesting that she took that, and she went into kind of quite depth about the kind of the history of like some of these masks, and she's written about it very beautifully in the notes. We have the next one, please. So this is Kyra Matuzik. Kyra is she's from Holland. She's a very experienced printmaker. You can't quite see the detail. Like when you get the book in your hands, you'll see how beautifully detailed this drawing is. And this is coming from the We Are Slaves section, the kind of the Maggid, the storytelling part of it, and it's very much reminiscent of kind of quite traditional imagery and printmaking. And she used this wonderful kind of cross-hatching technique to get this very kind of beautiful dark depth within the image. Really stunning work. And can we have the next image, please? And this one is from Yael David Cohen. She's an artist. She's Israeli. She's based in London. And she was given this was quite a tricky section, because this section was about the part of the Haggadah where we say that it was God's self who brought the people out of Egypt. It wasn't an angel. It wasn't that it wasn't a messenger. It was God in God's self. And so how do you depict? She had this very beautiful, quite experimental technique of working with aquatint, of working with the shading and lifting and taking off the image of like, how do you show kind of God's self, God's glory when you do not depict God? And it was like this beautiful kind of puzzle that she worked through there, and worked, actually, I think, Lorenzo, with your mum, kind of on some of the techniques that she was working with on this in this way. So the artists, we all kind of had our kind of different takes at different sections, but there was a lot of kind of informing and kind of helping each other as well with that. Can we have the next slide, please? Hoping we'll go. Oh, this is I thought we were going to go to Sophie, but okay, I'll talk about this. So this is my section. I was looking at in the Haggadah, when it's sort of telling the story of the Jews coming out of Egypt. It goes back to the beginning of Abraham, and it goes back to Abraham and God's covenant with Abraham that the people will go down, will become slaves, and then they'll be kind of become populous. And this covenant is known as the Brit Bein HaPetarim, the covenant between the pieces. And I had this image, and this image really came from also the experience of walking in Venice in these like very narrow alleyways, the narrow alleyways as you walk through and find your way through, and that Abraham sort of walked through the pieces. And so I took that image from there and have this sort of divided person, this divided self, with a kind of sort of hinting towards part male, part female. It has the text there. It has the kind of the split and the kind of the narrow places of Venice. Egypt, Mitzrayim, is described in kind of Hasidic thought as the narrow place. So it kind of is also very reminiscent of that. I'm hoping the next slide is Sophie's, because I want to now pass over to Sophie. So this is Sophie Herkseimer, who I'm going to introduce in person, because she's here with us. Hurrah! And Sophie was an absolute delight to work with, because not only is she a very experienced printmaker, but she's also a poet. And she hosted like lots of really fun poetry stuff for us to do together, and really helped kind of explore that other side of Venice. So I'm going to pass on to Sophie.
Oh, thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you for a lovely introduction, but also for this extraordinary experience of having the opportunity to be in Venice working. Because actually, although Venice is so touristy, to have an opportunity to be there and make some work gave me a very, very different insight on the city and the history of the city and the ghetto and the whole positioning of Venice, where it is on this huge pathway through the world of trade and of intriguing stories and extraordinary things. And this is one of the pieces that I made, the praise piece, and I had help with the Hebrew lettering from Jacqueline and Josh, actually, and I wanted to make something poetic, because Jacqueline kindly gave me this section, which is absolute poetry anyway, this section of the text, with the rams skipping like mountains and people singing, and this feeling of praise and the cosmos sort of joining in the praise. And I wanted to also reference some of the painters of Venice, like Bellini, and how in his rocky depictions of the Madonna and Child, he'd have very close-up grass and herbs and little flowers of spring in the foreground. And I thought this detail, having these tiny things like the little bits of grass, and then the huge things like the moon and the planets and the stars, could somehow mirror the scale of the relief and the release from slavery, and somehow put us into a different space, a sort of space of elation and joy. So I wanted to have this family together and this feeling of space, outer space and inner space, which I think is part of the story. And yeah, I can talk more about working in Venice and so on, but that's just a bit about the slide, I guess.
I think you should talk a little bit more about the experience in Venice, because Sophie, for us, the artworks, of course, are the final output, and I should mention that it's important to remember that now the artworks exist in two dimensions. Now they exist as art pieces in themselves, as a collection of beautiful etchings, and now they have a new dimension as a book. So they have this dual existence. But the experience of being together was, I think, very, very meaningful and very important for us. So I think that while we remember that two other artists will be mentioned in a few minutes when we see them in the pages of the book, but it would be great if you, Jacqueline and Mark, say something about visiting Venice not as tourists but as temporary residents who did something creative. Because for us, I think one of the tenets of Beit Venezia is that when people come to Venice with a creative or intellectual project, it makes a huge difference.
If I may, I sort of hold as my guiding light something Shaul said a long time ago, both to myself and to Murray Baumgarten, which is that, if you come for 2 days, off a cruise ship and you walk through, then you're just, a leaf sort of in the breeze. But if you settle for a couple weeks, right, or a month, or if you're that lucky, because it's not that easy always to be in Venice, you have other commitments, right? You really get the flavor of the place, and you really, like in Jack's illustration of the mitzarim, the narrow places, right, the alleyways, or in Sophie's Bellini's, right? I don't mean the cocktails, right? I mean the Bellini illustrations of the little bits of little tufts of grass. One really picks up the flavor of the place. I have to say that some of my most wonderful experiences have just been hanging out with Shaul, or I remember, and this has become part of my teaching, I remember the first time that Shaul and I and Giuseppe went to see Pierpaolo, and we presented the project. Really, Shaul had spoken to Pierpaolo, but we were bringing the materials for the first time. I always tell my students when we study medieval book culture that very often it was the case that Jews entered a shop of someone who wasn't Jewish, right, and did beautiful work, but they wanted something Jewish made. And they would say something like, we want a Haggadah. And the shop owner would say, a Hawada, right? And they'd say, well, it's a book like for Passover. What's Passover? Well, it's like Easter, but without Jesus, right? And a conversation ensued. Well, we walked into Pierpaolo's shop, and while Pierpaolo was more worldly than the illuminator of the Middle Ages that I'm embodying in that story, we really started from Aleph. We started from A, and what ended up happening was a number of things: the integration of text and graphics, the way Hebrew was used, right, with reference to the Hebrew text and the English text. How can I put it? Artistic choices that were also intellectual choices. So, like experiencing that in the context of being in Venice was very precious to me, and something I won't soon forget. And I still use the photographs of Shaul and Giuseppe and Pierpaolo in my classroom when I talk about the interaction, the patronage, craftsperson interaction in the Middle Ages. I'll shut up and let Sophie.
Well, actually, Mark, if Jacqueline and Sophie don't mind, since you've introduced Pierpaolo, I think maybe it's time to bring him on, because so the project has had different stages, and the final stages that is actually taking place as we speak, because as we speak, the press are actually working hard to produce the books themselves. So the Pierpaolo has been a fundamental player in this wonderful comedy. So I would like to invite Pier Paolo, because Pier Paolo is going to show the kind of magic that happens in his magical workshop. That, as you're going to see, it's a small place, but it's a place where all sort of wonders happen. And I want to take 30 seconds to say that Lorenzo and Pier Paolo have something in common. Really Venice, we are speaking during a pandemic. We're speaking in a moment of crisis, in a moment where we are constrained and we long for freedom. So Venice has been experiencing a crisis of over-tourism for some time. And you mentioned that, and many Venetians, or many people who are exploiting Venice, want Venice to be something that is quickly consumed. And then there are some oases of resistance. And I think that Lorenzo and the Scuola Internazionale di Grafica and Pier Paolo's workshop, that they do something incredibly beautiful, and it's kind of hidden from view. They are in corners that you need to find. And when you find these magic corners, I'm not entirely sure that they want to be discovered all the time, because they do some great work. But let me invite Pier Paolo and to say how wonderful it's been to work with him and to try to put together. And I'm glad that Mark mentioned that, yes, we were replicating something that happened 5 centuries ago, when Jewish culture became something that was also a matter of conversation, dialogue, and exchange. And that created a lot of sort of cross-cultural contamination, fertilization, and so on. Pier Paolo, can we have you, and can you show us your beautiful magic workshop? You should unmute yourself first.
Okay. Hello. Thank you, Shaul, and thank you, Mark. I remember when I met Mark the first time here in the bookshop, and when we discussed about this aspect, I remember clearly. And yes, working on this book has been a challenge for me, and I'm very proud to have been a part of this project. And for this, I thank Beit Venezia, and especially Shaul Bassi and Mark Epstein, who helped me to understand the importance of this project. And also something very, very special happened, because we worked a lot, very hard together. And I remember when we chose the fonts, we discussed about the different alphabets. That is one of the aspects that is most interesting for me, because yes, this place is I wish a living place, because there are different culture and different alphabets that meet together. And when I started this small publishing house, was one of my dreams to work with different alphabets, letters, and text. So thank you for this experience. That is something magic. Yes.
Pier Paolo, do you think you can give us a quick tour of the place?
Yes. Sorry, I am with the phone, so I think. Okay, it's very. There is a small print press, some wooden type. Okay, modern computer, some poster, some gift from artists, for example, Ferlinghetti or Ivy Way. That yes, we had a good friendship and collaboration for prints. And yes, books with the parallel text in different languages about Venice, or Chinese, Russian literature, English, and yes. And yes, it's a small window. Okay. And of course, you everybody are welcome here.
Thank you, Pier Paolo. And I don't want to create any confusion, but I think it's also your eye stopped for a second on our first collaborative effort that was I hope you can see that and that
yes.
the poems for Sarah, inspired by Sarah Kopiosulam, with Rita Dove, delayed Min Alexander, and Esther Starry Shore. But I think that now it's the time to officially launch and disclose the cover of the new Venice Haggadah. So I think I can ask Pier Paolo to, I think, turn the microphone off, because I need to. Okay, I will share this. So I think that, ladies and gentlemen, the new Venice Haggadah. And now I want Jacqueline and Sophie to say something more, because there are more artists to introduce and more of her work to be discussed in conjunction with the pages of the book that is going to be immediately available on Damocle's website.
Thank you, Charles. This is such a fantastic image to have as our cover. It is some artwork from Hillel Smith, and and it's really good actually to follow what we've just heard about type and print, because the cover is, I mean, he's taken the kind of Venetian architectural features, but the three words we have here in Hebrew, Pesach, Matzah, Maror, in the Haggadah, we have a text, we're going, like, if you don't do anything else on Seder night, you've got to just at least talk these three things. Like, these three things are the important things. But what Hillel has done here is that he's taken kind of the font, the style of lettering from three very different places of kind of Jewish kind of cultures. And he's written each one within that style, within the kind of those different types of lettering. So he's bringing together a kind of the diversity of kind of Jewish of Jewish culture, which is there in the Hebrew type, and he put that there, and it is like that is the essence, really, I think, of this project, of this kind of the Venetian setting, the diversity of the Jewish experience, and the essence of what we have to say on Seder night is all there in that image, and it's really beautiful. And it's done, and it's so simple, and it's so beautiful. And I remember kind of him painstakingly drawing out those leaves and the windows in the etching studio. Really looking at that, it really takes me back to kind of seeing him kind of hunched over his plate. But I want to just say, just before we get on to the other things, it's kind of just looking at your shop, I want to go back to Venice so much. It's such a little treasure house. It's so precious. It's like a little jewel. And I really want to kind of, one thing that strikes me about Venice and about the type of learning we did there and the people is we're really kind of looked at Venice as this place of transformation. That Venice, like, historically was that trading place where things came in and they were transformed into something else and then taken out, like the perfume industry, the perfume trade, all these crafts that happened there. And we were lucky to meet some artists who still were working within Venice. There was a particular artist, Marco Brunello, who Barbara introduced us to, and he did wonderful things with paper. He makes his own paper, very kind of recycling kind of old books and stuff and making his own paper. Really beautiful, thoughtful artist. But it's this place of Venice as a place of transformation, that we kind of, you come in with your preconceived ideas, like the kind of the imagination. Venice looms large in the imagination, and when you come there, it doesn't quite, there's something else going on, and it's sort of living there and being there for a longer period of time than most tourists. You get to see kind of that pace, you see that transformation, And I would say that transformation also is something that happens internally. Like I was transformed. I was changed very much from that experience of being there. And just the other thing about the transformation is that, which I thought was a really beautiful kind of poetic link, is that the ghetto itself is called Ghetto because it was the copper foundry. And there we were, however, hundreds of years later, working with copper plates to create artwork for this Haggadah, to tell the story. And it says in the Haggadah, like in every generation, you have to retell the story. So it was like we were taking this prime material of copper, which used to be worked in Venice in the ghetto area. And then the foundry was moved and it became the place for the Jewish communities to settle. And we were taking this essential kind of material and working it with acids and with the processes, and then creating artwork we're transforming it to create artwork. So I really love that printmaking has that kind of that transform. I'm trying to think of like that almost like alchemy quality to it, where we're taking metal and turning it into something else. So if we look at the artwork that we're going to see here. So here we have Haggadah. This is from the artist Josh Baum. Josh Baum is originally from Bristol, and he's now living in Israel. A really interesting artist. He actually trained as a traditional sofer, as a writing of Hebrew ritual, of Hebrew texts, of Jewish ritual objects, that kind of sacred writing, very stylized, very beautiful calligraphy, very much a kind of ritual about how you use the pen. And he ran a workshop in Venice about that type of writing. So that's one of his parts of his background. And in the song, in the kind of Haggadah, this song at the end where the goat gets consumed by the cat, by the dog, and then this hits that and everything. It's like everything kind of transforms and moves and shifts into the next threat, the next thing that's coming along to get at the goat. And he has this beautiful image here where he has all these different pieces there, all these different animals and beasts and threats coming, and he was also and it also comes up in another part of his artwork, in the other artwork. He was very taken with the amount of animals that are captured in the architecture in Venice, of the kind of in the stonework and statues, as you see in the streets, and he used a lot of them as references within his artwork here. So that's kind of Haggadah. And if we have the next one. And this is back to Hillel Smith. This is the same artist who did the cover. This is an extremely striking image. This is Manishtana. So this is the 4 questions. And traditionally, the 4 questions is said by the youngest person, the child, often the child at the Seder. And they ask questions, is curious about what's different about tonight. And the Seder, this weird, strange way of telling stories with rituals, is to make the children curious and to make them ask. And Hillel had this section, and he's created a set of building blocks of this child's toy of building blocks, very kind of taken sort of Venetian buildings and created building blocks that spell out the phrase Manishtana. When you look carefully into there, you see that actually it's spelling out Manishtana in the building blocks, in the blocks of Venice, but it's using a child's toy to do that. So it has that very different complex layers of reading of that image, and it's such a strong, striking image. Hillel comes with a particular kind of graphics background, and it's really clear in his work, and it's really strong in his work in that way. And now we go back to Sophie, and I'm going to pass on to Sophie. And it is so gorgeous. Just before I pass on to her, I just want to say how gorgeous it is to see the image with the text, with the Hebrew and the English, with the beautiful fonts that have been chosen, and the red that has come out, and it just fits together so beautifully. So thank you. And I'm now going to pass over to Sophie.
Thank you. Well, I completely agree, Jacqueline. It's very transformative seeing it with this beautiful text. And it really helps me to remember and think about what we were doing there, to see it set in this context. Because when we first got to Venice and we were looking, I mean, first of all, when I first got to Venice, I was transported into this world where I was coming to do printmaking, and the water was ink, because I came at night and I landed at the edge of the city in this inky water. And it felt like a strange spell being taken somewhere where the moon was shining on the ink, and that already felt like an etching plate with metal shining through and ink being rubbed on top, and these white spaces of St. Mark's Square being kind of revealed under this strange light and the stone ground, and how much like printmaking it already felt as soon as I landed in the city. So, and I took the background for this print from the terrazzo doorways all around the place and the broken stones, and thinking of the slaves breaking stones for Pharaoh, and how a broken stone could make something else, you know, whatever it was going to make it. You could actually make the future out of it. You could make an imaginary city out of broken stones. That's what we all are, perhaps, broken stones. I mean, that relates to partly the poetry that I wrote in Venice, which was also very much held in place by the combination, the juxtaposition of real Venice, getting to know it, and the Venice of Calvino and the imagination. So, yeah, again, I was honoured to have a very emotional passage to manifest on my etching plate, and I made many mistakes, as I usually do, in how I would represent it. But it feels it's given extra strength by the fact that it has the text next to it, and that somehow gives it structure and authority of being in this book. But the other thing I was going to say is that when we went to the museum, the Jewish Museum, and I looked at that ancient Talmud that was on display, I was rather blown away, because to me it looked like concrete poetry, which is something I'm quite interested in. Just the layout and the setting of it, and the kind of anti-linear progression of it as a piece of literature looked beautiful. It looked absurd. It looked mad. Like, how would you find your way around it? And Venice is also like that. So there's something so matching about the map of Venice itself, and the impossibility of negotiating it, the amount of lost getting. We did a lot of getting lost. I personally was perhaps the weakest in terms of my Jewish identity, because I can't speak Hebrew. I've never been to Israel. I've been brought up without that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of learning for me, but also, and a lot of being lost. And so I was particularly grateful for the teamwork of the other artists, and how we would help each other get around, we would help each other think, we would help each other study. And it was, and the Scuola as well, the kind of support there, the kind of Roberta, as Lorenzo mentioned, she was inestimably patient, and we could share techniques with each other about how to prepare the plates, and Roberta was always there to say, oh, this might work, this won't work, you know, and just, then we became this absolutely like motorized printing army when it came to making the editions. And it was like, who's going to be clean hands, who's going to be dirty hands? Through it we went in pairs, collaborating. So Jack and I were printing together, which was an absolute treat. I believe you might have been clean hands, Jack, but anyway,
I think I was.
I think that's
lucky.
You know, that's probably enough from me for now, but yeah, good. Back to you, Jack.
Oh, back to me. This is me. So this image, Open the Doors, is actually from at the end of the Haggadah, when we open the door for the prophet Elijah. And traditionally in the Haggadot, this is a time when there's all sorts of imaginings of the world to come, of the future. And I took this image of like the keys being open the doors and the keys being thrown up into the air. So these keys are kind of keys. I was very struck by in the markets in Venice and sort of flea markets in the squares of Venice. There was this kind of fantastic stall which had like all these amazing keys, and I kind of drew them and photographed them. I was really taken with them because there's something very secretive about Venice, that you don't really know what's behind the closed doors of, like, there could be like all these like secret gardens, or these you can't really tell from the outside what the inside of a building is going to be, or what that alleyway is then going to turn the corner and become. And so there's a feeling of kind of secrecy, and also for good reason there are secrets. For good reason things need to be kept hidden back and hidden away. And one of these doors that have been opened is actually they've got these very beautiful hinges, which is actually taken from one of the doors in the Jewish one of the synagogues that make up part of the Jewish Museum in Venice. And it's this sort of idea that actually there have been historical reasons to close doors and have secrets, but hopefully in the future doors can be open and there will be no more need for things to be hidden away, and we can throw our keys away and open the doors. So that was kind of very much like the thinking behind this image. One of the things I do want to say about the 1609 Haggadah, which Mark brought out really beautifully in his talk, is that the illustrations in that Haggadah had people doing ritual dressed in the dress of their day. They weren't imagining what Jews looked like hundreds of years ago for them, and they weren't imagining a kind of an Egypt of 100 years ago. They were putting their contemporary dress and their contemporary architecture into the work. And that is one of the things that I think all of us artists kind of really took up, like picked up that baton and go, right, that has given us permission to kind of go, well, who are we today as we meet the text, and put that into the work, and put that like our impressions, our thoughts, our perspectives into the work, because the text is there for us to interpret, and it's us to extend into our own into our reality. So I'm just gonna.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. I want to mention that for Beit Venezia is absolutely important to emphasize that we don't do the things just because they produce beautiful objects of beautiful experiences, but also because I think we are speaking to the need to think about the future of Jewish Venice and of the ghetto and of the city as a whole. There is a historic Jewish community that, whether we like it or not, is struggling. And I think this collaboration between local Jews, international Jews, and friends of Jewish culture is key to the future. People who will purchase this Haggadah will find a lot of wonderful things inside, not only the amazing visual component of it, and this is also the reason why we decided, as you remember, not to have any sort of extra commentary, because the images are amazing. There are some nice Venetian touches. There are some traditional Venetian poems that introduce the order of the Seder, translated into English by Lenore Rosenberg. And at the end, there is also the text in Judeo-Venetian of Haggadah. But most of all, there is also a very, very lively and interesting translation that was done by Mark Epstein. And I think I want to invite him in conclusion to say something about the text and how we can make use of it a few days from now when we celebrate Pesach.
Thank you, Shaul. In conclusion, it's a little sad because I really enjoyed spending this time with all of you, and hopefully with all of you at home. I have to say, I never thought that this translation would make it into a book. The truth is that as Jews of Ashkenazi, East European origin, the way we did the Seder in my family was that my Zayde, my grandfather, would just chant, Avodim Hayinu, we were slaves, Leparo, B'Mitzrayim, to Pharaoh in Egypt, and end with only one kid in English, only one kid, just like in Venetian, right? That my father bought for 2 zuzim, right? And the Haggadah was just said, one said the Haggadah. Moreover, in our family, we don't use a Haggadah because we have 5,000 Haggadahs in this house. And if that's the case, which one should we use? But I did a number of years ago write this very quirky translation. It's gender neutral. It attempts to be contemporary without being silly. It maintains midrashic and rabbinic references without footnotes and heavy-handedness, right? And it does fun things. It sort of opens the eyes to certain sections of the Haggadah that we might otherwise be like Sophie wandering in the streets of Venice, wandering in the Haggadah. For instance, this awful section where you have three rabbis debating how much to punish the Egyptians, right? And they do this whole math game. It's what I call the fun with math plague section, right? And they each try to multiply the plagues. And some people skip that because it seems too horrific, right? But what it is the human impulse to think about, what this enemies in a phantasmagoric way, right? The terrible things they did to us, what I wish would happen to them. And then, if you notice at the end of that, comes the famous song, Dayenu. It would have been enough. But they have to be read together. And in this Haggadah, they are read together, right? Enough with this calculus of suffering. If God had only taken us out of Egypt and not done a single other thing for us, it would have been enough, right? So you have both perspectives. The perspective of someone at the Seder who might say, we got to give it to those terrible oppressors throughout the centuries. And people are saying, enough with the giving and the taking, and let's just focus on the important things, right? And so the Haggadah the translation tries to do what Jacqueline just talked about in terms of the old Venice Haggadah and the new Venice Haggadah, that is to clothe the words to which we become sadly inured because we say them again and again and they're familiar to us, without changing the traditional words, to present them in a way in which they are as the anthropologist and not the jeans manufacturer Claude Lévi-Strauss said, bon à penser, good to think with. And that was my goal. And in a way, it's a very intimate enterprise for me as much as for the artist, because I took something that we just do at home, that we have, you remember mimeographs and typewriters, right? Pier Paolo, you may recall, right? That we have mimeograph sheets, that I've been working on since 1980 or whatever, and brought it really to a larger public. So that's been very exciting. And in that sense, I think it fits well with what Jack and Sophie have worked on. I want to thank all of you. You have been extraordinary, exceptional here. The book is wonderful. It is actually, with this launched, it will be available. It will be available to you in Italy. It will be available to you in wider Europe. It will be available to you in Israel and America and any place, right? Through the magic of internet ordering. And we're very, very excited, that it will find its way from our hearts and febrile little brains and this beautiful Venice of reality and imagination to your table via the wonderful Scuola Grafica of Lorenzo and the amazing little print shop of Pier Paolo, and under the auspices of all you wonderful people. So thank you so much for joining us.
E se vegno il gatto che gamma il capretto, che gatto fra sopare,